care about. My joy, my life, my identity is all wrapped up into these into these earthly things. And yet Paul says, no, your life is hidden away in God. The reality of who you truly are is in God. Your real identity is hidden in God. Your real life is hidden in God. Your real joy is hidden in God. Your real sense of purpose and accomplishment is hidden in God. And yet we struggle because there are three forces in this world that try to pull us out. See, the truth of who you are is hidden in God, but there are three forces that will try to pull you out and get you to refocus on earthly things. Would you care to know what those three things are? Paul tells us. He's pretty straightforward here, and he lists them off for us by way of commands. Would you go ahead and read with me? Verses 1 through 4 we already read, but I'll highlight the part that means something for this point here. He says, "Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." Paul gives a command. He says, put your minds and your heart on things above where Christ is. You know what that teaches me? That teaches me that our thoughts have the power to pull us away from God. Our thoughts have the power to pull us away from God. When I was a sophomore in college, some of you know a little bit of my story and how I met my wife. But I met my wife down living on the beach. The one time I actually had a chance to live on the beach in Southern California, I met her down there. And it was like a whirlwind of amazement. It was like, love at first sight kind of things. I'll tell you the story some other time. Some of you have already heard it. But the point is, we were only together for about a month and a half before she had to move back here to Indiana to go to Purdue. Woo! You guys are, come on. Yeah, there you go. Anyway, she had to move back here to go to Purdue, and I was moving to Chicago to go to Wheaton College to finish up my education there. And so we were then going to be 3 hours away from each other after only knowing each other for 2 months at the most. But see, I was committed. See, I was sold on this girl. She was it for me. I was absolutely convinced that she was the one for me. I'd kissed her, and that was it. That was a done deal for me. And you can know my past history and stuff, but I'll tell you about that some other time. Anyway, I had committed to her. I told her that I loved her. I was in all the way. And she is living 3 hours away from me, and we've only developed a relationship that goes about 2 months long. What do? Well, the problem with college is that every time you go back to school, new women show up. And there was this one girl that I was beginning to notice. And I was having a problem with this. And I began to, I would look her up in the Facebook thing that we had was actually printed. And I would look her up in that thing and find her picture, find out her name. I'd see her on campus, and my mind began to wander, get a little distracted, something like that. And my heart began to get frustrated and annoyed and sad and irritated. And it was like a struggle until I would shift my mind to put the attention back onto Jen, and then my joy would return. I would remember who she really was. I would remember what our relationship was really all about. My joy would return, and this other thing would just fade out. These other feelings or distractions would just kind of fade out. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but Jeff, God says to put your mind on things above, not on earthly things. And isn't that relationship an earthly thing? I'm telling you that story to illustrate 2 parts. One is that our minds can distract us from what's really important. And we have to get our minds back on God to recover our joy and those kinds of things. But the other thing is that Paul here doesn't say only think about heaven from the time you wake up until the time you die. He says, put your minds on things above where Christ is seated on the throne. This is my understanding of that. Wherever Christ is seated on his throne, that's a thing above. Set your hearts on things where Christ is seated on the throne. And in this particular instance, that summer I was in Southern California, I said a prayer to God, and I said, God, I want to be completely focused on you and your will for my life this summer. If for never again in my life, at least this summer, I want to be completely 100% totally focused on you. And I said, God, would you either remove my desire for a relationship with a girl or give me the one who will be your gift to me that I will marry? And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I met Jen, and the rest of it began to just happen. And so, the way my relationship with her progressed, the entire time we knew each other, was an attempt to keep Christ on the throne of our lives. And therefore, when I thought about her, my joy could return. You see, what I want to challenge you about today is to realize that you already are in God, but your thoughts can pull you out. And so I want to ask you to just reevaluate your thoughts. I've got 3 things here for us to consider when it comes to evaluating our thoughts. Number 1 is this: what do I let into my mind? What do I let into my mind? Because the things I let into my mind are, number 2, the things that swirl around in my mind. What are the things that I ruminate on, that kind of I think about over and over again when it's late at night and the TV's off and I'm laying in bed and I'm not thinking about anything else? What do I think about? What are the things that keep popping back up? And then here's the third one. Do I think of those things the way God does? In other words, is Christ on the throne of my thoughts? Do I think of these things the way Christ does? Paul never says, and God never tells us through Paul, that we have to stop thinking about everything. Instead, he says we need to start thinking about things the way God thinks about them. You see, God knows all about the sinful patterns of behavior in this world. And he thinks about them. And so the question is not, can I get those thoughts out of my mind? The question is, can I think about them the way God thinks about them? You follow me on that? And if we can get our minds in line with how God thinks about this world, we will be more aware of our presence in God. Okay, 3 things pull us out from God. Number 1 is our thoughts. Number 2 is this. Let's look at verses 5 through 7. Paul says, "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the